130 years ago, in another world, the little A1X Terrier represented state-of-the-art locomotive design. The London, Brighton and South Coast Railway used them on commuter trains, and it was said that if you could drive and fire a terrier, then you could drive and fire anything. Terriers were gradually banished to the outposts of the Southern Railway system, and for the next 60 years, almost unnoticed, they hung on, too useful to scrap.
They're 1870 technology, aren't they? Made out of wrought iron, to obviously a very old design, but they stood the test of time.
The Isle of Wight was one of their refuges. The island was always a dumping ground for clapped-out rolling stock from the mainland. The A1Xs gave sterling service here until the end of the Second World War, when they were repatriated to the mainland. There are still a few Isle of Wight engine men who can remember them here, like Ken West, who returned to work on the Terriers in the preservation era.
Just lay the water out the main res. Once you've been stood all night with some water accumulated, that's how your brakes work freer.
Ken joined the railway as a lad at Newport Shed and got to know the Terriers well.
That's the pump. West needs a pump. That's what works the brakes. Both these locomotives I fired far back as 1946. I fired them up what was known as the Merston of Ventnor West Branch. And that was very picturesque and a pretty little job. Engine one and two coaches, what they call push and pull.
Sometimes, in emergency, the Terriers worked the heavy holiday trains, and Ken can remember the day this very engine ran out of coal.
We booked on a turn of duty at Newport Shed, and the only locomotive they had, funny enough, was this one, number 8. Now we had to take that one with 5 coaches to do 4 trips of K's and 3 trips of ride, and we run out of coal about 8 on. But she done the job, and she's pulling 5 of them. You're talking about 130 ton empty.
But the Terriers weren't popular, particularly with firemen. A day on an A1X was a backbreaker. They were just too small, and the firehole door was just too low, so the fireman would be either bent double or banging his head.
The Terriers have a very low-pitched boiler. The firebox door is on a level with your toe caps, and it's about the size of a large letterbox. You can never see your fire unless you turn yourself into a hairpin and stand doubled up. The cab roof isn't high enough for a man of my height. The injectors are halfway up the side of the engine, and to work them you have to lean out to see the overflow while you're trying to put the injector on with the controls in the cab.
The Terriers may have been a nightmare to fire, but firemen don't have a vote at head office, where the bosses identified plenty of uses for a Terrier.
Well, I think really it's just that they were so useful. Some branch lines, like the Hayling Island line, of course had a weight limit, and the locomotives were needed to be small enough to operate the train service. But they were used in all sorts of areas, for shunting and station pilots, and it even had one in Brighton Works that was the pilot there for years. Just useful, nice little engines.
More than anywhere else, Hayling Island, between Chichester and Portsmouth, was the Terrier's salvation. A branch line left the main line at Havant. 2 coach trains, headed by a tiny Terrier, would set out to cross to Hayling Island from the mainland. There was a long bridge across Langstone Harbour, and nothing else available was small enough to cross it, so the terriers had the place to themselves. But it wasn't an easy day's work for the engineman from Fratton Shed in Portsmouth, and these images from the early 60s show the grimy reality of everyday life with steam. A quick wash and a cuppa were life's little pleasures. 40 years later, the surviving engines are good as new, but even in the gentler world of preservation, the terriers still have plenty of enemies among engine men.
Well, I personally think Stepney, the little A1X, is a children's favourite. It's a nasty machine. That you've really got to work hard on a terrier. If you can fire and drive a terrier well, nothing else will be a problem to you.
It's strange to think that the London and Brighton Railway relied on these finicky little machines to rush city gents to work in an age when people were less tolerant about getting to the office late.
These engines are actually built for London commuter traffic in the 1870s, and the reason they're called terriers is they were actually quite fast in between station stops. The coaches at the time being a lot of small wooden bodied vehicles. I'll now put the engine into reverse gear, and that will enable me to go backwards. I'll make the brake again, and this time I'll have to open the regulator because we're going uphill, so we need steam, and off we go. Just comes to a stop again. And applying the brake, hopefully for a gentle stop. And I put it into mid gear. That's like neutral in a car.
The oldest of the survivors, Fenchurch, has been remodelled at the Bluebell Railway into its original A1 form, with distinctive pipework between the tanks and the smoke box.
To represent the originality of the class when they were A1s, it was necessary to change the smoke box and a lot of the pipework and details that are on the engine. The chimney's new, and it's made, I'm sure you'll agree, a very attractive little locomotive. The thinking behind it really is to show the public and show railway enthusiasts how these engines used to look many, many years ago.
At the end of the 19th century, when the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway had its terrier fleet in service, a fleet that helped to cement the reputation of Stroudley as a designer, the London and South Western Railway had its own brand new tank engine and an equally celebrated designer, Drummond. This is the M7 tank, one of the largest of the 044 wheel arrangement. It was another of those survivors, engines which became railway antiques simply because they were too good to throw away. Like the terriers before them, the M7s found their way into the backwaters of the Southern Railway.
Their two main jobs were either push-pull work on branches, which they were fitted with the Brighton type of compressed air push-pull gear, and they would propel one or two coaches up and down a branch. The other job, for which quite a number of them were used, particularly in London, was for empty coaching stock workings from Waterloo out to Clapham Junction.
They'll pull 13 coaches with no problem. They'll even accelerate in mid-gear pulling 13 coaches, which takes a bit of strength.
We used to pull trains from Bournemouth West station up into the sidings, and we used to even work empty stock trains with them. And you might have a 12-coach train with an M7, and they used to handle it.
They were capable of a gallop. Commuters were getting home to Guildford faster 100 years ago than they are now. Sometimes a country train would take passengers and goods.
Well, certainly further west in Devon and Cornwall, there were the branch train was really the only form of communication, so they would have to carry not only passengers but parcels as well, milk as well, and the milk would come up from collecting points in churns, in wagons like the Van B, to a point where they would all be transferred onto a train that would then go up to Vauxhall. Normally in Hampshire and Dorset, you would see them with 2 and perhaps 3 coaches, push-pull, passenger only, where the freight business didn't exist.
At Bournemouth, Mike Standhaft worked in the push and pull link with M7s.
It was a good link to be in, because the fireman spent most of his time on the footplate on his own. So the fireman was actually driving the loco and handling the engine for most of the time. That's why it was one of the senior links.
At the Swanage Railway, Mike helps to look after the sole surviving operational M7. 30053 goes down in history as the luckiest survivor from the steam era. They'd actually started cutting it up when an American bought it over the phone. And it only came back from the States when the Americans realised they weren't allowed to run an engine with no leading wheels. But what are these engines like to drive and fire? Well, the answer is that they're roomy and powerful. But if the fireman can't keep the pressure up, then Drummond engines will bite.
It can catch you out very quickly, definitely, yeah, and it catches people out. And suddenly the fireman will notice that he's losing his steam and he can't imagine why, and he's looking in there to see what he's done wrong, and he's just thinks to himself, what have I done? Another trip, everything's all right. So if you do, just let the fire go thin in a certain area, the steam will fall back very quickly.
The M7 waits at Norden, the park and ride northern terminus of the Swanage Railway. Mike Standhaft is at the controls.
We're only on the first valve of the regulator, and the lever's up in about 30%. I try to give her the first valve fully open and then keep the lever up above 35, 30%, 20. And when I'm on the level, I pull her right up inside 20 to 15. And that cuts her right off, and then she works lovely.
The Swanage Railway in the shadow of Corfe Castle is one of the most scenic routes in Britain, and it's also a working railway, helping to take road traffic out of the Purbeck Hills. It's the perfect setting for an M7. The engine's owners are pleased to keep alive this tribute to the designer.
Drummond was a very clever man, although, you know, when you look at a simple locomotive like that, and it is simple, you don't realise the subtlety that's there. You only really find out about that when you're using it or when you're restoring it. But it's a wonderful machine.
They were very comfortable engines to ride on. They're a lot more comfortable than the modern standard tanks to ride on. Why they were like that, I don't know, and I think a lot of it was to do with the fact they were inside cylinders, and an inside cylinder engine always rides better than an outside cylinder engine.
Mike Standhaft believes the M7 in its day was the equivalent of the final versions of British tank engines, and the Swanage is in a good position to judge, for it operates 2 of the British Railways standard tanks.
That engine is the modern version of the M7. That was built for suburban trains, and the M7 was built for the same job in its day. So virtually, the 2 engines, the standard and the M7, were designed in their day for the same job.
The third main constituent of what became the Southern Railway was the South Eastern and Chatham Railway, who'd inherited machines like this and rebuilt them to their own liking. The 060 tender engine was to become one of the mainstays of 20th century British steam. This version is the O-class, rebuilt as the 01.
Well, the locomotive was built at Ashford Locomotive Works by the South Eastern Railway, and as you can see, it looks quite old because it was built in 1896. It was subsequently rebuilt by the same company in 1908 with a bigger boiler in, as you see it now, and was class 01. Originally it was class O, and it's the only type of this engine really left, apart from our C-class, which you've seen here, which is very much from the same stable, and make a lovely pair to look at.
A chap I know who was a driver at Bournemouth, he worked in 01 on a fast passenger train from Waterloo to Bournemouth, and he said it went beautifully. So they've got a lot of ability, those 01s. They're terribly primitive though. They're a bit like a Great Western engine. When you're trying to oil them up, there's places you just cannot reach. There's no steps to climb up at the front of the engine, so you have to climb up at the back and walk along to the front to do half of the oiling. The axle boxes can't be oiled simply by filling an oil box with pipes running to the axle box. You have to dive in head first and find the axle box and poke oil into it itself, and there's all sorts of strange things like that. But that aside, they're very nice engines. They're very comfortable to drive, easy to fire. I think from the firing point of view, there's only one thing wrong with them, the tender. It's got a limited water capacity, and because they had to poke in as much water as they could, they've made the water container a square box. The coal lies on top of the square box, so there's no depth of coal. The bit that you shovel from the space that you shovel from carries about a ton of coal at the most. Once you've used that, you've got the problem of getting the coal off the shelf into that hole. In BR days, it was simple. You climbed up there and shoveled it forward while you were running. But they wouldn't allow you to do that now.
Here, the 01 is double-heading with another southeastern design, the C-class. And at a casual glance, the 2 machines look identical, though the C-class is a more modern design altogether, a Wainwright creation from Ashford Works at the beginning of the century, and now turned out again in all the original glory of the southeastern.
There were 109 of those C-classes built. They were, heavy goods vehicles or heavy goods locos of the day, very soundly engineered and a little bit more modern in the sense they had better valve gears and rather more robustly constructed. And the boilers were a good deal bigger as well. I mean, they used to not only run goods trains, but the sort of hot picker specials and excursions like that.
What we found was that they were extremely strong, very, very strong, but their brakes were no good. Remember, we were working freight trains, not passenger trains. Now, when you're working a freight train, the only brakes you've got are the engine's brakes and the brake van at the back. If you have 600 tons on with a C-class, although you can pull 600 tons, you've got a very hard job to stop 600 tons. The handbrake on a C was useless, so we were used as firemen to walking over to the handbrake and checking the train down. When you tried to do that with a C, nothing happened. Then when the driver put the brake on, nothing happened again, because the arrangement of the brakes on a C is such that there's hardly any braking effect. So although we liked them for their pulling abilities, we didn't much care for them in comparison with Brighton engines for their stopping abilities.
In recent years, Clive Groom, the leading steam teacher in Britain, has passed on his skills to hundreds of enthusiasts. His footplate days and ways courses have turned many volunteers into drivers and firemen.
Well, you can gather more speed than that. It'll build up slowly anyway.
Firing the engine is the hardest bit, as much an art form as a science.
The trick is to work on a fire so that flame comes through the whole of the surface cleanly and brightly, without smoke, without any thin patches where cold air will get through. And you work the fire in accordance to what's going to happen in the next 10 minutes. Because what you do doesn't really have effect for 10 minutes. So if you've got a bank approaching and you know the engine's going to be worked hard, you have to thicken the fire up before the bank in such a way that the extra coal doesn't cool the fire down, and in such a way that when the blast comes on the fire, there's sufficient fuel on the fire bed to withstand the blast and it doesn't draw holes in the fire.
Among Clive's most accomplished pupils are his daughters, and today Elizabeth is on hand to show just how easy firing can be.
Right, now the fire, as you see, is